Hello and welcome back to my channel. In today's episode, this isn't really going to fit anywhere. We're doing an update on my life and what's been going on because as you've noticed, I have been absent for a month and some of you have noticed. So for those of you who have noticed, thank you. For those of you who haven't, I've been gone for a month. So I uploaded my last video a month ago. Probably roughly a month, 5 weeks would probably be my guess. Would be my best guesstimate. I'd have to go back and look at the last upload. But I uploaded my videos and I went to bed. About 30 minutes after I had gone to bed, my husband wakes me up because there was a loud thud. My mom had fallen in her bedroom and we had to take her to the ER and she'd hit her head. She had torn like her shoulder, the rotator cuff in her shoulder most likely, and she couldn't move her arm like this. She's still having somewhat of an issue, but it's a lot better. So she needed help just doing some basic things. So my focus was on her. She started to get better, but in the time that she got better, she also had a hip replacement scheduled for a couple of weeks ago. And so we took her to have her hip replaced. Everything went beautifully. It was a total of 9 hours, but it did go beautifully. We were actually stuck in my car, and I'll do a story time for that later if you guys want. But we sat in the car for 7 hours, but we got her home that night, got her into bed. She was good, started giving her medication every day. She was doing really well for the first 3 days. On the 4th day, she seemed a little tired, but not too big of a deal. But the Friday morning, when she woke up, I went downstairs to help her get to the bathroom and to get her ready for physical therapy in her day, and she just didn't seem quite right. She seemed like she was high, but I hadn't given her any painkillers the night before, so I was a little bit confused, and I tried to ask her if she had taken any painkillers, and I couldn't get like a coherent answer out of her. This one's tough, guys. So, I was like, okay, I'm gonna get you up, and we're gonna see what we can do. And as I was getting her up, she would just like fall backwards. And so I went and I got my husband. I said, something's really wrong with my mom. And she couldn't, like, I was like, Mom, follow. And she couldn't, she would just stare. And then she started to puke a little bit. And I had my husband go get the car so that we could get her into the car to get her to the ER because I was worried she might be stroking out or she might be having an embolism problem because my mom does have a clotting disorder that causes her to clot a lot more easily than the average human. And as I'm trying to get her ready and get her up, she starts talking to someone. I'm out of the room and she starts talking to someone. She was hallucinating and talking to her dad, which is terrifying within itself when your mom just had surgery and she's hallucinating, and she's admitting to hallucinating because she's fully aware that her dad is dead. She just is hearing him and talking to him. So I get her to the hospital. I don't go to this hospital unless I absolutely have to because it is a terrible, terrible hospital. But I'm worried my mom is stroking out and is literally the nearest hospital for like an hour. It's my only hospital within an hour of my house. So I get her to the hospital. Her blood pressure is 70/44. For those of you who don't know, that is extremely dangerously low, especially for someone like my mom who has hypertension and her blood pressure normally runs borderline too high. She is less coherent. She can no longer get up at all at this point, and I'm trying to figure out if she's having a stroke or what's going on. So they get her back, they put fluids in her, her blood pressure still won't stabilize. They start looking for the cause of what's going on. So they take a bunch of blood, they take a bunch of tests, they do MRIs, x-rays, a bunch of stuff. And in the process of doing this, they already admit that they're going to admit her. Cool. Tell me what's wrong. Cool. Well, they officially figure out that it's sepsis. My mom was in sepsis. She had had a infection around the incision site of her hip, and it had become septic. Yeah. For anyone who doesn't know, that's incredibly dangerous. My mom is also diabetic, but she doesn't take insulin. She takes something called, I think it's metformin, I think is what she takes for that. I'm not 100% sure. But she is diabetic. She does take medication for it. But she doesn't take insulin because insulin will, if you give her insulin, it will shoot her blood sugar down really, really low. Okay, so we've established she has sepsis. Her blood sugar is a little bit spiked. Not dangerously spiked, just a little bit spiked. And so they come in, the doctor, the hospitalist comes in, And again, my mom is not coherent. My mom couldn't tell you who the President of the United States is. My mom couldn't tell you her date of birth. My mom couldn't tell you where she was at this point into her admission process. I am the person that is responsible for making her medical decisions if something goes wrong. There's literally paperwork that says it's me. I'm sitting in the room, and her hospitalist comes in, and he is literally the worst hospitalist I have ever encountered in my life. He walks in, I introduce myself, he completely ignores me like I'm not there, and then proceeds to go and talk to my mom, who is not coherent. The woman doesn't know her date of birth, who the President of the United States is, where she is. None of it. She knows none of it. And he's like, well, what do you want us to do at the end of life? Do you want us to do CPR? And my mom goes, ask my daughter. I don't understand what's going on. Ask my daughter. And he's like, no, you're sitting right here. I have to ask you. My mother can't tell you who the President of the United States is, yet you want her to make a decision on whether she wants CPR and life support? Are you effing kidding me? She has a living will. It clearly states, me, this person right here, sitting in the corner, trying not to freak out and murder you in your sleep, is the person responsible for that. He won't listen to her, and he demands that she tell him. And she's like, well, I have a DNR, just ask my daughter. Like, she repeatedly keeps saying this over and over and over again. And he's like, I'm not going to ask her. You have to tell me right now what you want. If you code right now, what do you want? He is now terrifying my mother. Terrifying her. The woman doesn't know where she is, and he's terrifying her for no reason. Okay? He then proceeds to finally coax an answer out of her that she would like life support but not tubes, which, by the way, is also in her living will if he'd have taken 10 seconds to look at the paperwork. He also could have talked to the person sitting in the room that was coherent. He then asks her if she wants insulin, and she says no insulin. He orders insulin. She doesn't want insulin. We just went through. If you give her insulin, it's going to short it out. So I'm thinking that they're going to admit her and she's taken care of. So I go to get food for like 30 minutes. I left the room for 30 minutes. 30 minutes. And somehow between there and there, it looks like they gave her insulin. Because her blood sugar dropped down to 40 and they gave her a shot. To this day, I don't know if it was insulin. No one will tell me. But I'm pretty sure it was insulin because her blood sugar dropped from a normal range down to 40. 40. 40. Anyone who knows insulin ranges knows that's really, really bad, especially when someone's already got a really low blood pressure. Her heart rate was just... I did not find this out until I was looking at her MyChart, looking at her insulin levels throughout the day, and found that it had dropped from 160 to 40. 40. 40. He waited for me to leave the room and asked the incoherent, unconscious person who could not tell you the President of the United States was to make that medical choice that could have killed her. Okay? So that night, they admit her with an infection because they finally stabilize her blood pressure, and they're like, we're going to admit her, which we already knew because they'd already planned to admit her. And they're like, she'll have a bed in like 30 minutes. You can go ahead and go home now. You've been here for, at that point, I think I'd been there for like 10 hours. And I was like, I'm starving. I need to get more food. I need to get a shower. I just need to go. So I go. At like 9 o'clock at night, I go home. I get some food. I'm frustrated. I go. My husband's also not feeling well, and he just wants to get home. So we go home. 10 o'clock rolls by. They're supposed to call me when she goes into her room, right? They're supposed to call me. No one calls me. 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm still waiting to hear where my mom is. I called the emergency room. She's not there. Call the front desk. Obviously, no one's at the front desk, so it takes me to the operators, whatever. It rings. For 6 minutes, it rings. I get through to the person. They hang up on me. This is going to be a pattern, by the way. You'll see what I'm talking about in a minute. They hang up on me. They don't answer. They literally can hang up. So I call back. It rings. Clicks out. Rings. Clicks out. I think I called like 7 times before I finally got someone who gave me her room number, which was, at the time. Now, I don't know if I asked them if that is the cardiac ward, the ICU, or the surgical ward, because those were the options of where she was going to go. Actually, the cardiac ward wasn't even an option. It's where she ended up, but it wasn't an option. It was either ICU or the surgical ward. I don't know in the hospital where the surgical ward is. I don't know where any of this is. I asked them, they won't tell me, but what they will do is they'll connect me to the nurse's desk in her thing, and they can tell me her condition, what room she's in, what ward she's in, all that stuff. So they connect me to the nurse's desk. I call and 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 I call. It rings for 20 minutes before a nurse picks it up for the second time in that night. Someone picked it up. You can clearly hear them pick it up and click. So at this point, I'm angry, I'm in tears, and I am losing my effing mind. Because I don't know where my mom is. I don't know her condition. I don't know anything. We were at the point where the nurse's desk wasn't picking up, right? Yeah, the nurse's desk wasn't picking up. It rang and rang, and they clicked. And I called again, it rang and 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 nothing. I couldn't get the nurse's desk. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. I haven't known where the frack my mom is for 10, 11, 12, 1, 6 hours. 6 hours, they can't tell me my mom's condition, where she is, any of it. My husband's already passed out. I've taken anti-anxiety meds. I can't just get up and drive there. The amount of rage I was feeling at that point. 2:30 rolls around, 2:30, 3 o'clock rolls around, and my mom calls. My barely conscious, coherent mother calls me because she can't find her phone cord in her bag and tells me that she is in what room she's in, which I already knew. And then she manages to catch a nurse walking by and asks what ward she's in, so I know where she is. I still don't know her condition. I asked her to see if she can read any of the, monitors that have been keeping track of her blood pressure and her heart rate and all that stuff. She can't, so I still don't know. But I at least know she's alive and in the cardiac ward, which wasn't even an option given to me when they told me that they were going to put her in a room. They said surgical or ICU, not the cardiac ward. It's okay. I'm going to breathe it out. It's okay. Well, the next morning, I try to call the nurse's desk. I get up at around 10 o'clock because I'm exhausted. I get up around 10 o'clock. Call the nurse's desk. Still can't get a nurse to save my life. Call my mom. Call my mom's room. Call her thing. Can't get her. Cannot get my mom. Can't get a nurse to tell me her condition. Can't get diddly squat. I am petrified with fear. And I try and call her, and I try and call her, and I try and call her. And I'm afraid to go in. Because I'm afraid I'm going to walk into her either being dead, or I'm going to walk into her being on a ventilator, which is two things I really don't want to focus on. And I definitely don't want her on a ventilator because it's not what she wants. And then she goes in on a ventilator and they did that without her consent. It's a whole big deal, and I'm going to have to chew people out. So I'm stalling, and I'm just laying in bed trying to get my mom, trying to get a nurse, trying to figure things out. I finally give up, and I go in at around 2:30, 3 o'clock. Again, I don't know the condition of my mother, and I am deathly afraid. Deathly afraid I'm going to walk into my mother being dead. I get in there. I get up to the surgical ward, no, the cardiac ward. There's no one in the hallway nurse-wise. They're all apparently having a massive nurse shortage because they quit with the Rona and the overworking, because my area got hit pretty hard with the Rona. I get in. My mom is asleep in her bed. She's okay-ish. She's still hallucinating. She still has a really high fever. And I ask her why no doctor has called, why no nurse has called, no anything, and why I can't get anyone. And she can't tell me. She spoke to one doctor, but she can't remember the doctor. And she still doesn't know what's going on. I finally get to talk to a nurse, find out everything I need to know. Stay there for about an hour, find out everything I need to know. She's so incoherent that I'm like, okay, I can't. I'm not really supposed to be here. We're only let one visitor. Visiting hours are very strict. I'm going to talk to the nurse, see what I can get done, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go because I just don't have very many options. The next day, she's a little more coherent, and she manages to get across to her doctor that she's not comfortable making her medical decisions. Please call her kid. Please, for the love of God, just call her effing kid. And I finally get my first doctor 2 days after she was admitted, on day 3. No, I spoke to the crappy doctor that night, the one that would have been in the surgical ward doctor, so I'm so glad she didn't end up there. And the hospitalist that would have been for the surgical ward, I spoke to him that night, and then I spoke to no one for 2 days until that afternoon when the doctor told me, and they told me like the infection and the CBC and all of that stuff. And I want to give a special shout out to her doctor that she had, because her doctor was good. Her doctor kept me informed every day, called, we went through her chart, like detailed through her chart, her CBC, her chem panels, all of it. And I made sure that they didn't give her any more insulin, and she actually listened. And that was my first bright spot in the hospital. But then we ran into another problem. As my mom became more conscious, she needed to get up and moving around, because when you have hip surgery, one of the most important things is to get people up, get them moving around, do things like that. And they wouldn't do it. My mom was nervous about falling, and she said, I can get up and move around, but someone has to be there to help me and stay with me and catch me and do things like that. And I'm like, well, sorry, ma'am, if you're not comfortable, we're just going to leave you in the bed. I'm not entirely sure if some of those nurses were rotating my mom or not, because when she went in, she had no bed sores. When she came out, she had 3. And we'll get to that in a minute. Okay. So, she's like, yeah, they're not letting me get up. They're not letting me move around. And I'm like, okay, it's not good, but it's not world ending, I guess. I'm frustrated at this point. We're into day 3, and I'm frustrated. But at least the doctors are calling me. I'm able to say, hey, don't do this, do that. This is good. You're doing this test, cool. At least I know what's going on, right? Day 4, uneventful. They still won't get her up, but she's becoming more lucid. I actually stayed in there for like 5 hours because she was lucid enough to have a conversation. She wasn't trying to sleep, and I wasn't bothering her. I was able to help her get phone calls out. Everything was good. Day 5 should be day 5. Day 5, they had her up and in the chair because she had 2 really good nurses, but this one in particular had gotten her up and put her in the chair and allowed her to move around a little bit, which was really good for her. And I'm like, yay, she's getting up, she's moving around, she's feeling a little better. This is good. Day 5, they're telling me that she can't get up. Now, granted, she was just up the other day. She had just been up. And they're telling me she can't get up, she can't move around. And they blindsided her. They didn't come to me. They blindsided my mother the day before she was supposed to leave with a thing. Thursday. She came home Thursday night, so they blindsided her the day before she was supposed to leave. Was it the day before, or was it? See, this is all blurring together. So no, it would have been Wednesday. It would have been day 4. It would have been day 5. They come in, the person comes in, and they blindside her with, you can't get up, and you can't move around, and you're going to need all this care. My mom is more lucid now. Way, way more lucid. But she's still not 100% completely comfortable making decisions for herself. And she asks them to call. And they tell me she can't do anything for herself. She's going to need all this care, and she needs to go into a residential rehabilitation center. And I'm like, wait a second, that doesn't sound right. She was up in her chair yesterday. I need to talk to my mom. So I leave, and I'm like, I would like to meet with my mom. So I leave my house, and I go to meet with my mom. I talk to my mom, and my mom is petrified of this place. They blindsided my mom with it. And this place has a reputation for being total crap. And they petrified her. They made her sound like I was just, like, if I brought her home, I was going to be this burden and this awful thing where it would be impossible for me to care for her, and it would be too stressful for me. Like, they made my mom feel like garbage for having her daughter take care of her. I volunteered for that, by the way. I take care of my mom all the time, no complaints. And for them to make my mom feel like she was a burden, like she somehow or another needed to go to a rehab center because she was too much for me to handle, and I wouldn't be able to help get her up and move her around, to make my mom feel like she was too much for her kid without talking to her kid. I cannot describe the amount of rage that makes me feel. My mom is not a burden, and they don't get to make that decision for her. They don't get to scare her into doing what they want without talking to me first. I vetoed it. I was like, I think she's way more capable of anything than what y'all are telling. She says that if you help her and you just help stabilize her, she can get up. I know when I dropped her off in this hospital, she was capable before she got really sick of getting up and moving around. Do not make my mom feel like she is trash. Don't do it. Oh, give me a second, guys. I need a quick second to take a drink and gather myself for that one. So the next day is her release day. And, she's like, hey, they're releasing me. Come get me. I'm still running a fever, but it's okay. My vitals are good. Yada, yada, yada. I'm not hallucinating. Come get me. And I'm like, yay, I get to bring her home. After this ordeal, I'll know where she is and I'll know she's okay. So I am getting dressed on my way to go get her. And I get a phone call from the patient advocate thing, who's not a patient advocate. She is evil. Same woman that blindsided my mom. Evil. Just evil. Calls me and is like, yeah, your mom is going to need transport home because we can't get her out of the bed. And that's coming from the nurses, not the physical therapist. And how dare you? I'm freaking out because they're like, your mom needs transport home. Excuse me? What? But I do agree to the transport because I want to get her out of there. The transport's supposed to come at 4. And they're supposed to get her ready. Here's where it starts to get really icky again. They left my mom naked from the waist down. They were supposed to help her get her up, but because they deemed it too difficult, because all she wanted was somebody's hand to help stabilize her, they deemed it too difficult to get her pants on. And they left her for the transport, half naked and extremely uncomfortable and embarrassed. So I came upstairs and I got her dressed. I put her pants on, which, by the way, was not that hard. A nurse, I set off the bed alarms. The nurses did come looking for me, and I actually got a nurse to help me get her clothes on. Because literally all I had to do was roll her, then pull her up, etc. I'm like, okay, well, transport's gonna get home. I want to make sure that we can beat them home, so I'm gonna go ahead and leave. I've got you dressed. I've got all your stuff packed up. I'm gonna go ahead and leave, and I'm gonna beat the transport home so I can get everything ready, and they can just come in and drop you off, and it'll be good. We have to move the dogs, all these other things. I leave at 3:15ish. The transport's supposed to pick her up. That gives me 45 minutes to make sure everything's good. They can get her up the stairs, into her house, and into her little side room section thing where she'll be good. Okay, 4 o'clock rolls around. Nothing. 4:30 rolls around. Nothing. 5 rolls around. Nothing. I call the hospital. Call the nurse's desk. Ring, ring, ring. Nothing. I'm like, I call my mom. I ask my mom what's going on. And that's when we look up. If you can leave against the hospital's orders, if you can just get up and leave. If they remove the IV, can I just take her? And I brought my husband, who is more than capable of getting her up. In fact, we'll get into that in a second. Because again, good nurse that got her in a chair is the same nurse that's going to help us in a minute. But I bring my husband. So if they give me a hard time trying to take her, I'm going to sick my pit bull of a husband on them. So I bring my husband. And I bring him up, and I send him in the lobby. I go in my mom's room. Or no, I didn't even make it to the hospital. They had forgotten from 4 until 7 when I eventually got there that my mom was even in the room. They lost my mom. They didn't know she was in her room. They thought she had left. But my mom calls me on my way to the hospital, and she's like, did you bring me a change of clothes? And I'm like, no, I kind of forgot, but you have the clothes that you had just put on. You should be fine. I'll get you home and get you changed. And she's like, no, I just peed. I peed in them. I've been sitting in my own pee for like half an hour. I'm like, are you, what? What do you mean you've been sitting in your own urine for half an hour? They had forgotten she was in there. She'd pressed the nurse's button. Because the nurses were switching shifts, no one bothered to check to see if my mom was in there, and they left her sitting in her own urine for 30 minutes. I then came with a change of clothes. I went to 2 Walgreens across the street, got her a change of clothes, and then brought her home. Well, I hadn't got home yet. Got her there. Luckily, the good nurse and that nurse change thing, when they had officially switched over, in between that 30 minutes, somewhere at the very end of that 30 minutes that she had been sitting, they had changed nurses, and the new nurse had come in and noticed that she was in her room, thank God, and had gotten her at least out of her wet pull-up and put her into a new one. But they left my mom sitting in her own urine for 30 minutes, and she called me out of desperation for help while she was in the hospital, surrounded by people that are supposed to help you. So I get there, and I talk to the nurse, and the nurse is like, we didn't know she was here. Transport was supposed to get her at 4. We had no idea. We're so sorry. This is a really decent nurse. And I was like, I'm frustrated and I'm angry, but I'm not mad at this nurse. She was literally one of like the few godsend nurses. I adore her. She's amazing. And I'm like, I'm just gonna take her. We're not gonna play this bullshit anymore. My husband's in the lobby. I'm gonna pull him in. He's gonna lift her up, and I am just gonna take her. And she's like, what do you mean you're just gonna take her? We can get her up. The nurse, my husband, and me got her up in a wheelchair. She's like, I don't understand why they needed transport. She's capable, but you can clearly see. She's capable. We get her up. She's still running a fever, but she gives her all their nighttime meds, so I don't have to worry about it when I get home, which is actually really nice of her. I was really appreciative of that. But she's still running a fever, and I take her home. I get her in the car, and I take her home. She's not difficult to move. She was able to get up. She was able to walk to the wheelchair. She was able to then get to the wheelchair to the car. She was then able to get to the car, into the house without the wheelchair we have here. She walked in and into her own room, all because I gave her the hand support she was asking for. That was all it would have taken from the nurses prior to get my mom up. That nurse that I'm talking about had also done the same thing, just given her the support she'd asked for, and she was able to get up. Yeah. So she's home for one night. I'm cuddling her. I'm just happy she's home. I go to bed. I check on her every couple of hours. I rotate her because she does have bed sores, and I want to make sure she's decently rotated. I also check her blood pressure and her temperature all morning, all throughout the night, and I'm noticing a very alarming trend. As her temperature goes up, her blood pressure was going down again, and it was still within normal range, but it was steadily going down throughout the time period. And her temperature was still going up, and I was having a harder time stabilizing it than what I'm used to. I give her Tylenol, it would work for a little bit, and then we skyrocket back up. So I'm like, I need to take her back to the emergency room. I take her back to the emergency room, and they tell me it's going to be a little bit of a wait, but not too much. Her blood pressure is somewhat stabilized, so they stick her out there with no IV, no checking on her other than her blood pressure. No checking on her, nothing. They didn't check. She's sitting there for about 5 hours before she's like, I can't do this anymore. And I was already wanting to take her to a different hospital because I thought she was stable enough to at least get her to a different hospital. She finally relents and cracks because her doctor told her to go to that specific hospital because it was the closest with her blood pressure dropping. I finally get her to crack, and I take her to the hospital that is an hour and 15 minutes away. It is now like 9 o'clock at night. Not that big of a deal. I take her. They let me go back with her immediately. They take her back within like 10 minutes of her getting to this hospital. They take her back. They then treat the bed sores that the other hospital had left untreated. Yeah, they treated the bed sores. They weren't very deep, but they were still bed sores. They were still on her booty, and every time she pooped, she'd end up with it, and that's just a whole other infection waiting to happen. So they then got these pink pads that you're supposed to stick on that I had asked the hospital for that they had not given me, or put on her. They then put the pink pads on. They do some blood work. They see things, and they're like, well, we think that they just released her too soon, so we're going to go ahead and admit her. And mom's like, go ahead and go home. Everything's fine. And I look at the nurse, and I was like, look, I need to know where she is. All of that stuff. What a world of difference the hospital makes. I'm on my way home. I don't even make it to go get food at like 2 o'clock in the morning from Wawa's before she calls me, and she's like, this is the room she's in. This is the unit. I'll transfer you to the nurse's desk. Within minutes, the nurses picked up and said, well, we're just getting her. Let us evaluate her. We'll call you back. Nurses called me back, told me her condition, told me where she was, everything. Within, I'd say, an hour of her being admitted into that upstairs room. The next day, her doctor calls, talks to me, does everything. My mom calls, talks to me, does everything. Physical therapy comes in, gets her up, gets her out of her chair, gets her to the bathroom, moves her around, gets her moving around. And the second they start moving her around, her entire demeanor changes, and she starts to pick up and improve drastically from there. They keep her for 4 days where they're telling me everything that's going on. They're getting her up, they're moving her around, they're making sure she's eating, they're treating the bed sores, they're rotating her. They're doing everything they're supposed to. And I don't have to worry about my mom. I actually slept amazing knowing that she was well cared for in this hospital versus the other one. I nearly lost my mom because the hospital didn't care enough to treat her like a human being. They cared more about profit and other things than they did about my mom, even though they're in the same network. The hospital that I took her to is in a wealthier neighborhood. I live in the country. This is where I'm fairly okay. A lot of people around me are not. And it services several of the small areas around here, which includes like 4 counties. So no one gave a flying crap, and they almost killed my mom. I won't take her to this unless she's absolutely, had I not thought she was having a stroke, she would have gone to that hospital that was an hour away. I just didn't think I had time to get her there. But that's why I have not been on the thing, because I've been dealing with all of that and trying to take care of my mom and make sure that she's okay and make sure that she's well treated. Like I said, she did, if she's on TikTok for the first time today, she actually got out of bed on her own. She's been cooking her own meals. She's doing great now. We've been home for about a week, and I'm still been focused solely on her. With her doing better, though, I can come back and I can take some time for me. I can put on some makeup and feel like a person again, which is really, really good. And yeah. But that was why I haven't, because I had the worst hospital experience with her that I've had since her last surgery, and they nearly killed her with a pulmonary embolism at that same hospital. Yeah. Alright, I hope I did that calmly and rationally. I tried. And I will see you guys for my next